Good morning. After completing part 3 of the Constitution, that is fundamental rights, today we shall start part 4 of the Constitution. Part 4 deals with the directive principles of state policy, and part 4 contains articles 36 to 51. That means part 3 means fundamental rights are from article 12 to 35, whereas part 4 contains articles from 36 to 51, and part 4 deals with the directive principles of state policy. What do you mean by directive principles? Directives are nothing but advices, advisory in nature, means the Constitution advises the states to follow certain principles which are necessary for the welfare of the people in order to establish a welfare state. Then what are the provisions of directive principles of state policy contained in article 36 to 51? We shall see one by one. What is the significance of the directive principles of state policy? Hereafter, in short, for our convenience, I shall call directive principles of state policy as DPSP. D stands for directive, P stands for principles, and S stands for state, and P stands for policy. So we shall see DPSP hereafter. Followed. Then here they are only directives, means they are advices to the state. They are not mandatory, but they are in the nature of advice to the state. So we shall see what are the expected questions from this topic in preliminary examination and also in the main examination. So in preliminary examination, the provisions will be asked as it is. Followed, if any provisions are added later on means say after the commencement of the Constitution, what are the provisions that are added to part 4 of the Constitution, by which constitutional amendment act, and what is the significance of the added provisions to the DPSP. We shall see one by one. You know the importance of fundamental rights. Now we shall see what is the importance of directive principles of state policy. So here part 4 of the Constitution deals with the DPSP containing articles 36 to 51, which I have already explained. These are the directives to the state. So directives to the state means directives of the Constitution to the state. That what is state here? State means here that is the legislature and the executive. State mainly constitute the executive and the legislature. To strive means to endeavor. To endeavor means to try. Strive to achieve social and economic democracy. What is social and economic democracy? Because you know what is democracy. Democracy means political democracy. Followed political democracy. So, we have achieved political democracy with the independence itself. When we got the independence, so we got the political democracy. But what about economic democracy? And what about social democracy? So, these economic and social democracy principles are laid down in part 4 of the Constitution in the form of directive principles of say state policy. Followed. So, here social democracy, economic democracy, rule of people, democracy means. So, that means socially all are equal, economically all are equal. When we achieve this egalitarian society, then only we can say that the country has achieved and the country is enjoying the social and economic justice, economic democracy. These are also the directives to the state. See, the directives are given by whom? By the Constitution. Constitution addresses, you see, Mr. Say, you state, you do this for the benefit of the people, for the welfare of the people. So, they are also directives, means they are addressed to the state by the Constitution to promote social and economic justice, social justice and economic justice to all its people in order to establish a welfare state. So, means here say the directive principles or state policy are aimed at achieving a welfare state by securing social and economic justice to all its people. Followed. These DPSP set out aims and objectives to be taken up for implementation by the state in the governance of the country. So, the state is responsible for governance of the country. So, therefore, while governing the state, the executive and the legislature shall implement certain principles for the welfare state. These DPSP are aimed at achieving a welfare state by securing social, economic and political justice to all its citizens. Even there are certain principles. Principles means always you must understand directive principles. Dealing with political justice also. Political justice. For example, you take Article 40, deals with organizing the panchayats. So, that is nothing but political justice, because Article 40 deals organization of village panchayats. To strengthen the village panchayats by democracy. So, therefore, securing social, economic and political justice to all its citizens. Okay, this is okay. Then the idea of welfare state. What is a welfare state? The idea of welfare state can only be achieved if the state endeavor, means strives to implement these principles with high sense of moral duties. High sense of moral duties, because DPSP are say moral responsibility of the state, not legally bound, moral responsibility. Moral responsibility means a feeling of responsibility to achieve them, because they are not mandatory. Even if you don't want to achieve them also, nothing will happen to you. but it is our moral responsibility to implement them. Followed. Why? Because they are left to the future rulers of this country. Followed. And leaving them as their moral responsibility to implement these principles. The DPSP contain a comprehensive, comprehensive means a detailed economic, social and political programs, various programs as per the policies of the government. Say economic programs, social programs and political programs that are required for a modern democratic state. So, these programs are essential, they are required for a modern democratic state. These DPSP impose certain obligations, they impose certain obligations on the state to take positive action in certain directions in order to promote welfare of the people and achieve economic democracy. So, that means here how can we say that they impose certain obligations on the state? Means the state shall strive to implement, promote, etc., or the state shall endeavor, means here always the very purpose of the government, the aim of the government, any irrespective of the political party, whatever the political party that comes to power, either at the center or the states, they always strive to implement these principles. I will explain why. Even it is only moral responsibility, but every political party which is in power shall feel that these are the moral responsibilities of the government in power. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution, described the DPSP as the novel means a new, altogether novel features of the Indian Constitution. They are new features of the Indian Constitution. The DPSP, along with the fundamental rights, you see, the DPSP means part 4, along with part 3 means fundamental rights, constitute the very philosophy of the Constitution. See, very philosophy of the Constitution is contained in the fundamental rights and the directive principles of state policy. Followed. Not. In fact, the philosophy of the Indian Constitution is laid down in the preamble of our Constitution. What is preamble of the Constitution? What is the text of the preamble of the Constitution? The very text of the preamble of the Constitution is very text of the preamble is the philosophy of our Constitution. The provisions of fundamental rights and the DPSP together constitute the text of our preamble. Together constitute, because most of the provisions of the fundamental rights and the directive principles of state policy are included in the preamble. You see, for example, justice, social, economic, political justice, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship, fundamental rights. Followed. Then equality of opportunity and status, fundamental rights. Then fraternity, fundamental. So, therefore, fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy together constitute the very philosophy of the Constitution. That means, philosophy of the Constitution is nothing but the preamble, and most of the provisions of the preamble are found in these two parts of the Constitution. So, here the provisions of the fundamental rights and the DPSP together constitute the text of preamble. Most of the DPSP are aimed at establishment of economic and social democracy, which is pledged for in the preamble of the Constitution. Just now I explained this to you. Now, thus the provisions of the DPSP are aimed at achieving equalization or egalitarian society.